Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're tackling a topic that you requested, security and education in Nigeria. And we're going really deep using a recent news story as our guide. It involves the abduction of 20 medical students.
Yeah, it's a really harrowing story that unfortunately shines a light on some of the really big issues that Nigeria is facing right now.
Right, and it's about way more than just this one event. This article, I think it was written by Emanuela Olugunju, it really drew me in. So picture this. You're a medical student, and you're super excited to go to this national convention. It's in Enugu, and then all of a sudden your bus is targeted and you're kidnapped.
It's kind of crazy how vulnerable students are when you think about how widespread these security challenges are.
Exactly, exactly. And this article goes into some of the specifics, mentioning that the students were from the University of Maiduguri and the University of Jos. They were abducted on August 16th, 2024, and thankfully they were released on August 23rd. But here's the interesting part. The police report states that no ransom was paid, even though the kidnappers initially demanded 50 million naira. What do you make of that?
It definitely raises some questions. Don't get me wrong, the safe return of the students is obviously a huge relief, but those claims of no ransom paid always warrant a closer look. A lot of times there are these really complex negotiations and behind the scenes deals that are never made public.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder what really happened. The article does mention that the police, the DSS, and even the military were involved in the rescue.
The DSS being
Sorry, the Department of State Services, for those who aren't familiar with the Nigerian security agencies.
right.
But yeah, it sounds like a really massive coordinated effort.
For sure. It definitely highlights how many significant resources are deployed in these situations. And some people argue that those resources might be better used for preventative measures rather than reactive responses.
I see what you mean. And speaking of different approaches, the article quotes security analyst Inko Taraya Ipalabo, and he's got some pretty strong opinions on how things are handled in Nigeria. He seems to think that relying solely on these large national agencies might not be the most effective way to go about this.
Yeah, he really advocates for a more localized approach, specifically for state policing rather than using roadblocks everywhere, which he thinks are more for show than actual security.
Okay, I've got to admit, I'm not really familiar with state policing. Could you explain what that is?
Sure, it basically means that local governments within each state would have more control over security. The idea is that governors would be closer to the specific challenges of their regions, and they would be better equipped to implement effective security measures. So, like security tailored to their specific needs.
So instead of a one-size-fits-all from the national level, we're talking about empowering local authorities to address their own security concerns in a way that makes more sense for their area.
Exactly. And another key part of this approach, according to this expert, is the involvement not just of government agencies, but also local communities themselves. He's talking about engaging traditional leaders, community heads, youth groups, even vigilante groups to play a bigger role in securing their own areas.
Now, that's really interesting. So it's not just about who's in charge of security, but who's actually involved in making it happen. It's about bringing in a wider range of voices and perspectives from the ground up.
Exactly. And that leads us to a really crucial question. Could this focus on community-led security actually be the answer to creating a safer learning environment in Nigeria?
That's a question I think we definitely need to explore further. But first, let's take a quick break. When we get back, we'll dive deeper into this idea of community-driven security, talking about the potential benefits and drawbacks. Don't go anywhere. So before the break, we were talking about community-led security in Nigeria and how that could maybe help create a safer learning environment. It's definitely interesting, but is it really that straightforward?
Probably not. I mean, like any attempts solution, it's going to have its own challenges and complexities. We can't just hand over security to local communities and not think about what could go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. There's got to be more to it than that. So let's get into those complexities. What are some of the potential issues with this approach?
Well, one concern is that you might accidentally be giving power to vigilante groups who don't exactly follow the law. Nigeria has a history with these groups, and while some have been good for keeping order, others have been known to commit human rights abuses.
Oh, wow, that's a really important point. It's about finding that line right, giving communities more control, but not going so far that it fuels more vigilantism.
Exactly. And then there's also the issue of resources. Even if these communities are ready and willing to be more involved in security, do they even have what they need? Like proper training, equipment, and funding to be effective?
That's Like we're talking about building a whole new system from scratch.
Hmm.
And that's going to take time, money, and a lot of planning to get it right.
Right, and we can't forget about local politics and power dynamics. This
Yeah.
is about security, which is a really sensitive topic, and if it's not handled carefully, community involvement could actually make existing tensions worse.
Okay, so with all that in mind, how do we actually implement a system like this where it works? How do we avoid all these potential problems and make sure that students are actually safer?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It's going to take a multifaceted approach for sure. The first thing is that there needs to be clear communication and collaboration between everyone involved, the national government, state governments, and of course, the local communities themselves. If we want this to work, everyone needs to be on the same page about the goals, how they're going to do it, and the limits of community involvement. We don't want anyone going off script.
So it's about establishing trust and transparency right from the get-go.
Absolutely. And part of building that trust means giving these communities the resources to be successful. That's not just financial support, it's also training on things like conflict resolution, human rights, and responsible security practices.
So it's like education is a key part of this whole security strategy. We're not just talking about educating students, but entire communities on how to create a safer environment for everyone.
Exactly. It's about making security part of the culture, where everyone understands their role in preventing and responding to any threats.
This is all starting to make a lot more sense now. But let's get back to our main focus, education. How does all of this whole idea of community-led security, how does it actually benefit students? What would the impact be?
Well, just imagine students not having to constantly worry about being kidnapped or attacked on their way to class.
So it's about giving them back that feeling of safety, that freedom to learn and grow without constantly looking over their shoulder.
Exactly. And it goes beyond the students, too. When you give communities the power to take control of their own safety, it creates a ripple effect. It leads to a more stable and prosperous environment overall, which benefits everyone, including teachers, families, and businesses.
So this could actually improve not just the education system, but like the entire social fabric of these communities.
Absolutely. And that could be the most powerful and lasting impact of all.
It's an inspiring thought for sure. But the expert in the article also talks about how this local approach to security isn't just about stopping kidnappings and violence. He says it's also about dealing with the root causes of insecurity.
And that's where things get really interesting. Are we ready to go there?
Absolutely. Let's dive in. Okay, so let's talk about those root causes of insecurity in Nigeria. What did the expert have to say about that?
Well, he basically said that you can't really separate security from things like poverty, unemployment, and just an overall lack of opportunity. You put all those things together, and it creates an environment where criminal activity can really thrive, especially among young people who feel like they don't have any other options.
So it's like we have to look beyond just the kidnappings and the violence. We need to understand the social and economic conditions that are contributing to insecurity in the first place.
Exactly, and that's where his whole argument for community-led security gets really interesting. He really believes that when you empower communities to take charge of their own safety, it puts them in a much better position to deal with these root causes as well.
It makes sense. It's like they have a deeper understanding of the specific issues in their communities so they can actually work on solutions that address those challenges directly.
Yeah.
Kind of like a grassroots approach to social change, but with a focus on security as the foundation.
Exactly. He actually gave some pretty concrete examples, too, like communities coming together to create job training programs for young people, or even things like starting up community gardens to help address food insecurity. At first, those things might not seem like they have anything to do with security, but they're really getting at those underlying problems that can cause instability and crime down the line.
Wow. I never thought about it like that. It's also interconnected. And it makes you realize that real security isn't just about having more police officers on the streets. It's about creating a sense of hope and showing people that there's a different way, especially for young people who might otherwise get caught up in that cycle of violence.
I completely agree. Ultimately, it's about investing in people, investing in communities, and giving them the support they need to build a brighter future.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the reason we're having this conversation in the first place, the connection between security and education. When we can create a society that's safer and more just for everyone, we automatically create an environment where education can thrive. Students aren't afraid to go to school, parents feel good about sending their kids there, and educators can actually just focus on teaching and inspiring the next generation.
It's definitely a goal worth striving for. There are no easy solutions to the issues Nigeria is facing, but this approach that prioritizes community-led security, addressing those root causes, and just creating a more equitable society overall, that feels like a really good place to start.
It's a path forward, but it's going to take work. It's going to take collaboration, innovation, and a real commitment to making a difference. And that's where you, our listeners, come in. We can't just talk about these issues. We have to do something. So as you reflect on everything we've discussed today, I want you to think about this. What role can you play in supporting education and security, not just in Nigeria, but right here in your own communities? How can you be a part of the solution? It's a question worth asking and one that we hope will stay with you long after this episode ends. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and until next time, keep those conversations going.